Hello and a very warm welcome to another jam-packed edition of your favorite Sunday morning show. This is Media Monitor and I'm your host, Alicia Jali. Now, in a few minutes, we will be crossing live to our contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, who will give us the very latest on the elections in Tanzania. And we'll also have a critical look at the media coverage of the hashtag Fees Must Fall campaign. But first, the main stories at this hour. South African businessman and former Minister of Human Settlements, Vuyo Mvoko, is to run for the presidency of the World Soccer governing body FIFA. 62-year-old Mvoko is the fifth candidate to declare that he will bid to replace the outgoing Blatter. Students at the University of Witwatersrand have vowed to continue their hashtag Fees Must Fall campaign until all their demands are met, including free quality education for all. The University of Witwatersrand will remain closed tomorrow. Springbok coach Heineke Meyer says his beaten team have a big future despite their narrow loss to the All Blacks in the first World Cup semi-final. The Boks led 12-7 at halftime but went down 2018. While elections have got off to a peaceful start in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, polling stations opened on time at 7 a.m. and of course under the watchful eye of riot police. Let's now have a quick look at today's newspaper headlines. Now, South Africa's main Sunday papers all lead with the 0% fees increase at tertiary institutions that was announced by President Jacob Zuma last week Friday, all asking the big question: who will fund the billions of rands debt for the freeze on fee increases for next year? But let's have a look at all those newspapers. Well, even the Sunday Times' business pullout poses that vexing question of who will foot the bill of the fees freeze. Now, joining us for the first half of our program on the topic of leaders who cling to power, let's extend a very warm welcome to Dr. John Tesha from the Africa Forum, as well as Mr. Charlie Kumalo from Channel Africa. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to have both of you this morning here on Media Monitor. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Morning. All right. Well, 2015 has proved to be a critical year for African democracy, with citizens going to the polls in more than 15 sub-Saharan countries. Tanzania is one of those countries that are headed to the most contested election. And to give us more detail, let's now cross live from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Our contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, is there. Vuyo, very good morning to you. Please give us the latest on the polls in Tanzania. Have they been peaceful and on track so far?
No, I mean, you've got to be on the program. These people, no, we could be here, bro. Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Vuyo, good morning. Can you hear us? Please go ahead and give us the latest on the polls in Tanzania.
From SABC. Well, thank you very much, Alicia. I am indeed with former President Benjamin Mkapa, who just cast his vote. He's going to tell us how he feels.
I feel great, absolutely great. I'm delighted. First, because the cause of the campaign has been very peaceful. We have seen that our people are very politically mature. We've had large campaign rallies. They've all passed very peacefully. People have had time to contemplate about the promises that were being made, and the expectations can be properly assessed now. As you can see, there's an orderly situation here at the polling station. I hope it continues this way, because in this way we'll be able to maintain our unity and exercise our democratic right to choose our leaders in tranquility. So I am very pleased indeed.
Well, pundits say this has been the most energetic and probably the most contested election in the 50-odd years that Tanzania has been a democracy.
The results will show whether it has been very heavily contested, but certainly you can't dispute the fact that it has been probably the most expensive that we have witnessed since we went into multi-party system.
Do you have confidence that, I mean, with an opposition that may have been buoyed by big rallies and having made strides that they hope to have made, that they will be, are you confident that everyone will accept the outcome?
Well, I ask everyone to accept the outcome because the arrangements are almost impossible to fault. And the members of the Electoral Commission are people of great integrity, of a history of service to this country. And the arrangements, as far as I can see, are very, very clear and simple for everyone. One must have trust in them. And if you have trust in them, there's no reason to dispute the results.
Being a former head of state yourself, what in 2015 are the challenges facing Tanzania?
The three challenges remain with us. Ignorance and poverty and ill health, but also problems of access to water, to education, and so on. We have made great strides over the last 54 years or so, but a lot remains to be changed, to be realized. The greatest challenge we have is really to step up the growth of the economy, because that increases not only the revenues of the government, which enables the government to provide better services, but also increases the wealth of individual citizens. And so that is the challenge of growth. But in order to do that, we have good policies. I believe my party has very good policies that it has demonstrated over the last 54 years. But in addition to that, we must also remind ourselves of the basic policy line of Tanzania, which has always been elaborated by our founding president, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, which is self-reliance. We must be able to mobilize ourselves and our energies for development. I think those are the two challenges I see most.
On a last and very separate issue, Mr. President, there is an issue that's refusing to go away on the continent, and that is of leaders who want to cling to power no matter what it takes. Your view on that? Leaders who don't want to leave office, who will do whatever is within their means to stay in power.
I'm a constitutionalist when it comes to that. One must live by the Constitution and must live up to the demands of the Constitution. Situations will change from country to country, but on balance, I would say if there's a statute of limitations, the honorable thing is to stick to the statute of limitations. But it depends upon the country and what the Constitution says.
Should we limit it to that? One is just thinking, because as much as other democracies or some democracies do not want, do not impose limits, but should it be like that? Ideally, that is.
Ideally, every country must design a constitution which enables its people to live in freedom and development. And if this is the constitution so says, and it has the consent of the people, we must live by it.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your time. Former President of Tanzania, Mr. Benjamin Mkapa. And with that, it's back to you, Alicia, in studio in Johannesburg.
Thank you so much for that. That was SABC's contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, giving us an overview on the Tanzanian elections. Now, gentlemen, I think it's fair to say from what we observed there, it looks quite peaceful. Everybody's just standing behind the former president, and it looks like it's business as usual. Doctor, let's start with you.
We have had a history of relative peace in Tanzania, and I would not expect things would change now. The difference is perhaps 2015, we have the emergency or resurgency of, no, emergency, I would say, of political parties. It's the first time everybody would admit that we have an opposition that is somehow organized, somehow strong, but that's part of democracy. And I don't think the opposition would challenge the election results because of the institutions that we have created over the last 54 years. We have credible electoral system. Everything is in the open, and I see no reason, at least from my point of view, that the opposition will challenge. Now, we learn every day, and I work for an organization that monitors elections all over Africa. And there are shortcomings, but I don't think they're so strong as to derail the process of elections in Africa. We have many elections. This year alone, I'm told 14 or more. Yes. If you go through the election, we have had more than every year we have elections in Africa. And let me say this, that what we do not understand, and I think people should understand, and perhaps I should have begun with a proverb, that the story of hunting, that's an African proverb, the story of hunting always glorifies the hunter until the animals can tell their own story. Yes. I think today it's different. We, the media monitor, we can tell our own story. And the story is, it's not as bad as everybody is saying. Clinching into power, we may have a handful. But would you believe that today we have 45 former presidents who have left office democratically? This is a fundamental change on the continent.
That's very commendable, Dave. Yeah. Charlie?
Yes, my dear. What Vuyo has just said right now doesn't surprise me. I was expecting that. I mean, I've always followed and covered elections in Tanzania. They've always been peaceful. I regard Tanzania as a beacon of hope in East Africa, I mean, especially after Kenya disappointed us, a couple of years ago with that post-election violence that claimed so many lives. But what I'm trying to say is that the first president of Tanzania, Mwalimu Nyerere, had actually done a very sterling job to create that nation. And it's a nation of very content people, people with respect. And the ruling party, Chama Cha Mapinduzi, still enjoys enormous support, not through threat or not through persuasion, but people still honor it. People still respect it. Hence, you can see the situation doesn't change. It will take, I don't know how many years, for another party to come over and unseat the current party in Tanzania.
So everybody's pretty content with the current rule. All right, look, gentlemen, I think the former president mentioned a few issues that I want you to touch on. I know you did a little bit, Doctor. He said they're still facing challenges like, of course, poverty, education and health. And looking at the rest of the African continent, it seems we're facing the same difficulties.
I think so. Let me premise this by saying that it's unfortunate most of our parties on the continent do not have an agenda, election manifesto. We don't normally see that. It's taken for granted that they will address the issues. And for 50 years, we've been trying to address the issue of poverty. And we've not managed, which is an irony, actually, because we are regarded as the richest continent in the world, and yet the poorest. What has gone wrong? I think we need to look into our capacity to build democracies, to monitor leaders, and hold them accountable, to fight corruption and impunity. There are elements that draw us back, but on the whole, we have made tremendous progress on the political front.
All right, Doctor, let's leave it there. We'll discuss the African elections in depth after this quick ad break. Do stay tuned.
And I think if you can still see the nature of violence in our society, it indicated that we did not discuss this matter as the country, and therefore took everyone along. People still believe you fight authority, deal with it, ban the property, stop other people going to work, do everything, things that were done when we're fighting apartheid. I think we still have this as a deficit in our education to society, as part of the element that we need to build in the process of nation building. We need to deal with the anger of those who are not happy. For an example, people will stand up and say, we want delivery, but destroy the very things that have been delivered.
This is Media Monitor. Welcome back. Do share your views on today's discussions on Twitter at SA Media Monitor, as well as on our Facebook page. Now, in the past 20 years, many African countries adopted presidential term limits as part of a broader set of constitutional rules that accompanied the transition from personal and authoritarian rule to pluralistic governance. While term limits were widely embraced by the larger African public, these rules have in recent years come under increasing attack from incumbent presidents seeking to extend their stay in office. But to kick off our discussion, let's first have a look at the following insert.
Also say that Africa's democratic progress is also at risk when leaders refuse to step aside when their terms end. Now, and no one person is above the law, not even the president.
For me, I'm a believer of limited terms according to Constitution. I'm not giving it a blanket. If in Tanzania, my Constitution says 2 terms, full stop. Why do you want a 3rd term? What are you to demand a 3rd term? And we're lucky that our first president, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, is the one who established the 2 terms in Tanzania. He could have stayed on, we loved him, but he said, I live while you still love me. I don't need to wait until you hate me to leave.
Gentlemen, I really want to hear your views on why some African leaders want to even go as far as changing a legislation that was put forth by them to restrict to the term limit. Doctor, let's start with you.
Yes, it is actually absurd that you have, there are not many, you have a handful that have decided to amend the Constitution for their own sake. And this is totally unacceptable. Let me go back a little bit. In 2000, we adopted at the continental level a declaration on unconstitutional changes of government. At that time, the focus was on military coups. And I think we have addressed that. We don't have incidents of, we have 1 or 2, but we don't have incidents of military coups on the continent anymore. But in that declaration, we defined unconstitutional change of government to include change of the Constitution for the benefit of an individual. So that anyone who changes the Constitution on the 2-term limit or whatever the Constitution provides has actually committed an act of unconstitutional change of government. And therefore, as Africans, and through the AU, we can institute sanctions, we can limit his travel, and we can take a number of measures that are also prescribed. What we're seeing today is people clinching for a 3rd term. We've seen it in Burundi. It might happen elsewhere. But you've seen the results of this. People have gone on the street and say, we do not accept this because we have to remain within the Constitution. I suspect that and this is my own thinking, that anyone who wants a third term is hiding something. There's something seriously wrong, and that doesn't want to go. If you served 8 years or 10 years, and you have not done anything to your country, you have not improved your country, we do not expect, even if we give you another 5 years or 10 years, you will make any changes.
Step down.
And therefore, step down, you must go. And if you don't, then we will apply the provisions of the unconstitutional change of government. That has not happened yet. But I think the AU should start moving on that. It is not only in the declaration, it's also in the Charter, African Charter for Democracy, Elections and Governance. These are instruments that we have to hold some of these lynching power accountable, remove them, sanction them, don't do business with them. And we will also solicit the support of the international community so that we ostracize these people. And they become a pariah in politics and they can't go anywhere, so they'll have to leave. And we should not underestimate people's strength. They will go on the street, they will demonstrate. The bad thing is they respond with force. But I think we should be able to address some of these things.
Charlie, what do you think?
Yeah, as we are talking right now, the people of the Republic of Congo, that's Congo Brazzaville, are going to the referendum today, if they've started maybe, to see to it that the president, incumbent president, Sassou Nguesso, can extend his mandate. I wouldn't like to say a third term for him because he's been there for more than 3 decades now. Just to extend his mandate.
Yes.
Yeah, we've yet to hear what people say today. But it was a very bitter incident as well because it produced very bitter incidents in the country. Violence against the state, against political activists, ordinary civilians. But now on the issue of heads of state extending their mandates, violating the constitution of their own countries. First of all, if you get into office as a head of state, at whose ticket do you get into the office? Of the very same people who elected you, the electorate. You have to know that you are a servant of the nation, of those who bring you into office. And should it happens that you disappoint those people, they have a right at any time to say, pack and go. Whether your mandate is over or not, they've got a right to dictate to you because you are there to serve them. But now on those, like Nkurunziza, for an example, Kagame wants to do that. Joseph Kabila as well in the DRC wants to do that. For those who can do that and succeed, like Nkurunziza has done, they have to be held accountable even after they've left office.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I wish we could go on for the whole hour, but thank you so much, regardless, for joining us. Well, when Media Monitor returns, we look at how the media covered the university protest. But let me also bid farewell to my guest who gave us insight on the African elections. Thanks to Dr. John Tesha from the Africa Forum, as well as Mr. Charlie Kumalo from Channel Africa. We will be back just now.
Elsewhere on the sprawling campus, protests continued. A YouTube video shows DA leader Musi Maimane being booed and chased away by students.
welcome back. Now joining us in the studio to discuss the media coverage of the student revolt against higher fees. Let's now welcome Ms. Ponzo Pilane, a Wits University student and editor of the Daily Vox newspaper at the institution, as well as media analyst Mr. Chris Vick from Black Management Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Morning.
All
Just
right.
want to correct you. I'm a senior reporter, not the editor of the Daily Vox.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Let's hope that you also got that right at home. Now, the hashtag fees must fall dominated local and international headlines, with students demanding lower university fees. Now, this demonstrates that a hashtag has much more power than a mere symbol on social media, as it dominated local news. Before we delve into our discussion, let's have a look at this insert.
We agreed that there will be a zero increase of university fees in 2016. Discussions will continue looking at broader issues than the fees.
Ponzo, tell us about the Wits coverage, please.
So basically, today is day 11 of the protests at Wits University. They started about 2 weeks ago on a Wednesday, and they were. It was about the fee increment, the 10.5% fee increment that is scheduled for 2016. SRC and other student bodies at the university were not happy with the 10.5% fee increment, saying that the fees at Wits are already very exorbitant, and to increase them is to exclude certain students that cannot afford the fees already. So that's how it basically started, and it's been going on since then.
Let's talk about the coverage there, Chris. I mean, do you think that the media covered the plight of the students well enough?
If you look at Wits, probably, but I think what's missing is an understanding that this story's been brewing for months. It's been brewing at Fort Hare, it's been brewing in parts of Limpopo, it's been brewing at the University of Venda. And what's interesting is the national media only really starts to pay attention once Wits starts to erupt, which I think is probably a good thing. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have had 18 universities protesting last Thursday and Friday in 8 provinces. So a single incident became a national movement. I think an investigation or a discussion around how the media's covered it is like asking how the students have behaved, because the reality is there isn't a consistent narrative across all media platforms. I think some Daily Vox deserves awards for the work that they've done. They've done a fantastic job in capturing what the students feel. But some of the news websites, some of the TV platforms, some of the radio stations have not, it's like they've been playing catch up, that they haven't really understood the issue, they haven't understood how it's developed, and they're therefore unable to really explain it to their listeners, viewers and readers, which I think is symptomatic of the South African media environment. You know, some institutions are geared towards live coverage of complex issues. Others take their time to get on top of them. Others have disdain for what young people think and do. And I think that's the reality that we've been seeing playing out here.
Ponzo, how did you cover the protests in the paper, in the Daily Vox? What kind of articles were you writing?
So for me, I'm a Wits student as well, so I was directly affected by this. So I didn't mean to cover it to the extent that I did, or that we did. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So I was on campus, I went down to the different entrances that were blocked, and I realized, oh snap, this is really happening. Students are revolting against this. It was supposed to be just a 2-hour protest on campus, and it's expanded throughout 10 days now. So what I did is, I think what made the Daily Vox coverage better is the fact that we have cultural proximity. Like I said, I am a student at the university, and I also understand the issues, or why it is so important for the students to think that, to protest against fees. So having that contextual understanding of why the fee protests are happening in the first place helped better my coverage of that. So I think that's the advantage that I had. I understood the environment of Wits as well. I mean, in my few years at Wits, I've seen so many students get financially excluded from the institution. So this thing is a real thing. It wasn't just, oh guys, let's just not go to class, or let's just protest, whatever. it's affecting real
So you wrote
people.
quite emotional articles, I presume.
Yes, I wrote quite emotional articles, and I also just really documented. I used Twitter. I think that's where the Daily Vox coverage became amazing, because I was there all the time. So I would see something and I'd live tweet it. My colleague Alicia Jali was also there, and we were just live tweeting what we were seeing in the real time that it was happening. And it showed how we could use technology to further a story and maybe narrate it better, because there is no time to edit or to capture certain things.
Absolutely.
Half the time I was on Periscope as well, which is like a mobile live streaming app. And my hand was shaky and it looked ridiculous half the time, but it was raw footage, no lights, nothing, just what is happening and what the students are saying, how they're saying it without a filter from me as a journalist or from my editors as well.
Chris, now this story also garnered a lot of international coverage. Take us through that. What did you think of that coverage? Were they even faster than some of the local media, as you earlier pointed that our media took some time to actually wake up to the story?
I think they took even longer, I must admit. I mean, it was bizarre on whenever Oscar Pistorius was released from jail, that was the main story on a lot of international networks. Never mind the main South African story, it was the main international story. I think that they probably underestimated. But I think the other reality is there's not that much interest in South Africa at the moment. And it takes something pretty epic to get the attention of the international correspondents. I found when they did, they actually seemed to grasp the story quicker. Because I think that one of the differences when you're a foreign correspondent is you've really got to get on top of the story quickly. So you talk to people. Whereas I think quite a lot of South African journalists, not all because you can't generalize, but a lot of them were sort of putting their own framing on the story. And I think, again, this is where Daily Vox succeeded and some of the locals didn't, is Daily Vox was giving a platform. They weren't trying to analyze, they weren't trying to comment. Whereas I think that in the South African media environment, too often reporters, particularly covering live issues, think they have to help us understand what's going on. I mean, there's a moment on ANN7, I'm sorry to diss one of your competitors, but when the police started firing tear gas at the students who were trying to break the fence, the reporter was saying things like, the police have been forced to shoot. Now, I mean, unless you're a police commander, you don't know whether you've been forced to shoot or not. It's that kind of commentary which I think is unnecessary. We can see what's going on, we can make up our own minds, but it's also pretty inflammatory. And I think it contributed to a bit of the hostility that we saw from some of the students towards the way the media was covering it. They're putting this filter and this lens on it, what journalists call news values. They're putting a particular set of news values on a story where it was unnecessary. They should have just told the story, let us make up our own minds, and try and give a bit of depth rather than just, covering everything in a very hush-hush way. Interesting to look at the Sunday papers. I think they've realized that. There's an attempt to sort of join the dots and look at different angles. But it's the first day in this process, I think, where we've really seen some proper reflection by the mainstream media.
Bonzo, I wanted to ask, I mean, did any journalists come to you for verification of the stuff that you were putting online?
No, definitely. A lot of people kept on asking me, is this really true? Is this really? And it was funny.
But were these journalists, people that really wanted to write a real story?
Yes, but however, even in those cases where they were inquiring, they still took some of the information that I would give them and misconstrue it. I would watch.
Give us an example.
I will not mention the
person involved. Yes,
but however, somebody said I am the student leader. One of the publications said I'm the student leader of the protest, and I was like, it takes just going to my Twitter handle to realize that. So there was also a lot of laziness that was involved. There was a lack of trying to understand. People came in with certain assumptions, and by people I mean journalists. They came in with certain assumptions about what the protests were about, and they didn't try to understand it from its students' perspective. And so that whole assumptions and the judgments that are made had already clouded whatever they saw. And there was an incident one night talking about how...
All right, Bonzo, let's hold it there quickly. You're going to continue. This sounds very interesting. After the break, we continue with our discussion. Do stay tuned.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015. Let's do this.
Morning Live sets the agenda for the day.
We bring you the latest local and international news.
We are on the ball with all your sports activities and results.
We give you the latest business update.
We bring you the latest weather every time.
Watch Morning Live every weekday morning at 6 o'clock, bringing you everything you need to know before you go. Shap shap, tada.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015. Let's do this.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor live here on SABC News. I'm with Ponto Pilane from Wits University and Mr. Chris Vick, a very popular media analyst, and we're debating the recent protest over varsity fees. Do share your views on Twitter. Ponto, quickly give us that example.
So, like I was saying, the information was there, and people, like the journalists, had all the information, and students were just really tired. I think by day 5 of the strike, of the protest at Wits, students were tired of how they were misrepresented on mainstream media. They started a hashtag, the real Wits story, and they were looking at all the articles that were out there, and they were telling on Twitter, they were like, no, this is actually wrong. This is how it happened, so and so. And so there was a live mass meeting on one of the days, and one of the broadcasters was live broadcasting out, and the students got so angry, and they just plugged out the cords out of the cameras. And obviously, as a journalist who's doing your job at that moment, it's terrifying.
Absolutely.
And yeah, this was live on national television, and so they were so angry. We went outside. They asked all media personnel to go out, and they were very angry, the journalists. And I tried to explain to some of them, I'm like, but do you understand where the anger and dissent for journalists comes from? The fact that they've been misrepresented. Take the car incident that happened on Empire Road, right? I tweeted that and picked some of the pictures. The picture with the car rolled over had almost 200 more retweets than the actual story of the fact that that motorist tried to run over students that were sitting on Empire Road. So you already see the fact that another newspaper ran with a caption, hooligans, and that picture that, I mean, would you be happy with somebody misrepresenting you, and would you welcome them into that space?
Not at all. And I mean, talking about that, I mean, SANEF released a statement yesterday, Chris, and they were talking about the intimidation of journalists during these protests. And they said anybody who was intimidated must come across now. And then you hear stories like this. What do you think?
I won't tell you what I think of SANEF. I think let's have that conversation another day. I think, I mean, they came to the story late again. You know, I mean, I think this thing has been going on for a long, long time. I don't see, there's two things that I think are missing from that statement. First is, I don't think there's any introspection on how the media itself has covered it and a conversation within SANEF around it. The second is, I think there were very provocative moments of media coverage which have triggered what they call intimidation. The hooliganism one, right? I mean, I saw the pictures that Ponto was tweeting of this white kid with an okapi in his hand trying to drive his car into students. Now, who are the hooligans, right? When you're trying to protect people's lives. Some sections of the media reported as hooliganisms. The other key word is hostage. That when Adam Habib was with students on Friday night, last Friday night, not this Friday night, I think only one channel was broadcasting it live, but you could clearly see that he wasn't a hostage. He was sitting with the leadership of the university.
There was
he was
even
engaging.
food
He was sitting
available.
on the floor. That is not a hostage situation, right? But when you start to put tags like that, when you start to call legitimate student protests hooliganism, and when you start to talk about hostage taking, you have a right, or you have to expect that there's going to be some kind of response. I don't think it's cool that journalists got bricks thrown at them. I don't think it's good that Ponce got tear gassed either. I don't think any of those incidents can be condoned. But the issue is, where's the reflection on what led to that? Why were students angry? Why were they irritated? Why at the union buildings were students, the first thing they did after they broke the fence was they tried to cut the cables of some of the live broadcasters. Okay. Because obviously they don't feel they're being reflected adequately. I think that's the kind of conversation that SANEF should be having. I think they should also acknowledge the thousands and thousands of students who were incredibly disciplined and in some cases looked after journalists at the union buildings in particular. A more complete thing than, you know, wrapping your fingers, because I think there's a paternalistic and a patronizing tone that runs throughout this conversation. These are not kids. These are young adults. These are the future of South Africa, right? And if we want them to trust the media that we have to build that trust through responsible coverage, not being judgmental, and I think as in Daily Vox's case, giving a platform to people who feel that society is not listening to them. That's why things went the way that they did. I mean, I think the students felt, we've got no choice here. We don't want to do this. But if Dr. Nzimande is not going to listen, and if the university management seems unable to do it, we are going to escalate the situation. And I think that's part of the conversation that we should be having, is did the media in some way contribute? Or did they try and diffuse by being judgmental? Did they try and explain the situation to people? And I'm sorry, there's one particular point that I feel very strongly about, is I think South African business has been let off the hook completely on this thing, right? You can look at who's responsible for funding universities. The state is doing what it can, universities are doing what they can. Now there's been a protest. Business is sitting on billions of rands that they don't invest in infrastructure, they don't invest in anything else. They should be investing it in education. There's a perfect opportunity for them now to step up and say we will contribute.
Absolutely.
But where are the journalists asking the questions of business? Where are they taking this conversation to try and look at ways of dealing with things differently?
Ponzo, now another social media frenzy was, of course, the reactions after the president's announcement. And of course, you were tweeting about such things. But do you think some of those things were misconstrued about the visuals that we saw afterwards?
So the visuals are completely misrepresentative of the students. I was at the union buildings. I didn't have media accreditation, so I was in the grounds with the students, right? Which is actually where I wanted to be. So it broke on Twitter. My Twitter account was there. My editors confirmed it. And I wanted reactions from students. I walked around for about 10 to 15 minutes. None of the students on the ground knew. On the grounds of union buildings knew. So firstly, that is the biggest problem, the fact that students organized buses walked to the union buildings to hear the president address them, and he doesn't. And he goes on TV for 5 minutes, or however long that was, because I didn't watch it as well, and says, oh, yeah, guys, you get what you want, and doesn't also address the other issues, right? So students didn't know. So many students were still singing and marching around union buildings because they didn't know.
That the president had already addressed the nation and not necessarily them.
And then there was this thing about a security threat. However, 10 minutes before that, there was somebody with a PA system who had said that the president is coming out. So in the ground, people were confused. And also talking about how social media is like the place where the story really happened. Not everyone is social media inclined, right? The only reason, and that's where the class issues came about with the University of Wits, Wits University and TUT students also came out, right? Where, yes, Wits students had the capability to use social media to their advantage. First of all, we've got uncapped, unlimited Wi-Fi on campus all the time. So even if we don't have money or data, we can still tweet it out. Yes. But it is not the same case with the TUT students. So, and they were the majority since it was Pretoria. And so you saw that the news hadn't hit the ground. And even when we started getting tear gassed and shot at, half the students still didn't know what was happening.
Jeez, hey, it must have been quite a chaotic scene now that you describe it and you were part of that. But to wrap this up, we've seen the revolution of the hashtag, the fees must fall, and they have. What now?
I don't
the
agree.
Fees haven't
They're frozen. They haven't fallen.
Okay,
and I think that
way forward.
Well, I think that's the story, right? Is where is the money going to come from? The Sunday Times today.
The biggest news for today.
Where's it going to come from? What happens when it doesn't? Right? What happens when students go to register at Wits or Univen or Forte next year? They're still going to need 40 to 60,000 rand to get in. even if the fees are frozen. I think that's the next wave, right? And I think, in a sense, government might be deluding itself that students are happy, they're going to go home, or they write exams and then go home, and life goes on. A lot of people's minds need to be applied to frozen fees are not enough right
Look,
now.
a vice-chancellor in one of the universities in Cape Town alluded to that fact that, we don't know how the president's announcement is going to affect each university. So they said they really couldn't give their students answers at that point, Bonds.
Yeah, true. I mean, yesterday, Wits students announced that they will continue protesting. The university was supposed to open tomorrow. It's not, because students feel like their demands are not met. There is no like plan to a strategy for free education, firstly, and things like that. So they are still going to go on, and now we have to talk about where's the funding going to come from? Is private sector going to get involved? And are other funds going to shift from certain departments in the government?
All right. Yeah. Well, those are the questions we're waiting for answers to. Now, the conversation and support on social media on the tuition increment has sharply increased. Let's have a look at some of your views regarding the hashtag fees must fall, hashtag fees have fallen. All right, Dito Dlamini says media coverage was excellent. I still feel the struggle is not over yet, as sponsors just stated. After 2016, then what happens next? I think Chris Vick also wants to know. He says it brought about utmost prominence as hashtags drive and give talking points a great deal of momentum. BJ Motapeng says the media has done a sterling job. However, I'm disappointed that they were being intimidated by students and police. Well, that's a new version. That's a different version we're hearing today. Kenneth Mungena says, as always, media was chasing negative things, digging, blade must fall, targeting, honor kick Tswane students demands, and of course demands a secret. Thank you so much to Kenneth Mungena for those. Well, unfortunately, that is where we have to leave it this week. Thank you so much for watching. Chris, thank you so much. Ponzo, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a live broadcast from Auckland Park at our headquarters. Remember, we're back next week, Sunday, for another special broadcast of Media Monitor. Do find us on YouTube, Facebook, as well as on Twitter. I'm Alicia Jali. This is SABC News. Stay blessed.